Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Anderson. Welcome to The Road Not Taken. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Matt LeBris, who was born and raised in New York, who inevitably caught the hustler's spirit that fills his hometown streets. He is a Forbes 30 Under 30 nominee. Matt's worked with Daymond John of ABC's Shark Tank for the past 3 years, on top of hosting the Decoding Success podcast, founding his branding agency, 1B Branding, and traveling the country to speak in front of audiences, which helps to propel him closer to his goal of positively impacting the lives of 1 billion individuals. Sounds like the absolute perfect fit for this show. Matt, welcome to the show.
Matt, thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you. I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'm excited too. And I know we will get into sort of the topic around personal branding. But first off, one question I always love to ask, which is kind of around the day of, what prompted you to want to take your life in a different direction in terms of making a change where, you're kind of at a very, very low point and you decided to take a different road?
That's such a great question. First and foremost, I do want to credit you for, an amazing question. And I feel like it's a bit loaded on my end because I feel like I've had multiple days where my life's really changed, and for the better, of course. And, you gave me such a great introduction. I'm grateful for, but I do want to let people know that are tuned in. Life has never been just peaches and cream, right? Working with the Daymond Johns and traveling the country, life is not always peaches and cream. And in fact, I've had quite a few down times, whether that was failing out of college or getting kicked out of 2 high schools, or financial struggles when it comes to business, losing my dream of playing professional baseball at 16, right? All of these things have added up. And a day that really stands out to me where things really changed was sitting in a friend's restaurant. Now, at this point in my life, I had to have been in my early 20s. I'm 26 now, so it's probably in my early 20s. And we're watching a TED Talk. Now, at this point in my life, I am so hyper-focused on making as much money as possible. Now, I just transitioned to go back to college to get my 4-year degree after graduating with my associates. I was finally accepted back in after failing out. I was working 5 jobs, hustling. So I'm just stacking all this money, owning a business, like really feeling like I'm living a great life. And as I'm watching this TED Talk, and I'll mention the individual who was giving it later on, I'm watching this TED Talk with my friend in his restaurant, and 3 words completely changed my life. And the 3 words that were said were legacy over currency. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, Matt. I'm telling you, it hit me so hard. It dawned on me like, hey, dude, like you're literally living your life the complete opposite way. As just mentioned, I was hustling for money, yet what was I going to do? Take it to the grave? You know what I'm saying? And it was in that moment that a switch flipped, I should say, and it made me realize how much I want to impact people.
That's it. That was a few years ago. So then what happened next? I mean, literally what happened next?
No, that's a great question. And, I went to school, and I was never one to do anything for free. I was never one to stay on my college campus for more than I had to be there. And, even when I had to be there, I probably wasn't there. That's exactly why I failed out. But what I did do was get really involved. And I started attending a college in not the best neighborhood in New York, really not the best. It was an underprivileged neighborhood, although now if you go over there, it's almost like it's on the verge of being the next Manhattan because of being the transportation hub over here. But I started dedicating my time to growing the entrepreneurial community there. And I think that was the start. And then I realized, like, what else can I do? I became the entrepreneurship club president. I became an ambassador of student entrepreneurship for the City University of New York, which is 24 institutions wide. Like, little things like that really started to become habits of mine. I'll call them habits. And it continued to trickle into more and more things, and into exactly what I'm doing now by graciously being a guest. And again, I'm grateful for the opportunity, being a guest on your podcast, speaking on stages across the country, hosting my own podcast, things of that nature. It's amazing to see the compound effect of that one day.
So what's going through my head at the moment? I mean, from the little pieces that you've shared, it sounds like you've almost always been really driven. Because you said you had a baseball dream that you lost at 16. So obviously you must have had to work hard to do well in that sport. And then it sounds like you've had obviously challenges, academically, I guess, but you've always been driven. I mean, people don't work 5 jobs. I mean, almost no one. I've ever met worked 5 jobs. So can you talk about the word is dichotomy really, but the opposites of what people are already hearing from the audience standpoint in terms of, have you always been someone that's been kind of an achiever type? And what's perhaps those biggest obstacles you've had to get past to flip your energy into sort of focused more in a positive or a more exclusively positive direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another great question, Matt. For the perspective of sports, right? When I look at that perspective, I can't lie to you and say I've been this amazingly hard worker and, this and that. Honestly, number one, it came from passion.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love the game. I played baseball and basketball at a very high level. And, my dream was honestly it came crashing down when I tore the labrum in my shoulder at 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
It was just gone.
Yeah.
But before that, I have to admit, I've been blessed. And, I think we all have different types of blessings. All of us are blessed in some way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Me, it just so happened to be that I'm 6'5" and freakishly athletic.
Wow. Okay.
So it did come rather easy, to me for sports.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say I'm a pro at every sport. I obviously I'm not playing Major League Baseball or I'm not in the National Basketball Association at the moment. But when it came to competing, I mean, I was fairly gifted,
mm-hmm.
and just putting myself on the field and exerting minimal effort in that sense got me to where I was. Now, when it comes to hustling and things of that nature, working 5 jobs, as you mentioned, again, I can't necessarily take credit and say like I have some special formula, but what really sparked that was the fact that I was watching my mother battle cancer. I had just failed out of college, so I had all this time on my hands. And when I look back, I realized that I may have been working that many jobs to stay out of the way, or to honestly maybe heal myself of the pain I was dealing with on the inside when it comes to
mm-hmm.
watching a family member or a friend, specifically a mother. I mean, I'm a mama's boy. I have no problem admitting that. I'm a mama's boy. So to watch
mm-hmm.
your own mother battle cancer, I feel like that was what kind of sparked it. But now where I'm in a position, in the present moment, now I find myself really hustling because honestly, as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you know this, Matt, most of the time we have our backs up against the wall in some situations. So you have no other choice but to move forward, right?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So, okay, again, I want to be, everyone wants a candid conversation here. I mean, it also sounds like you've had some pretty significant pain in your life, and because I've interviewed a lot of people for this podcast, and been read no shortage of books that I've read over the years. The more I'm coming to the conclusion that on some level, the people that achieve the most have also experienced the most pain, and I'm curious how you. Well, I guess I don't know if you necessarily agree with that, but that's one of the things that I didn't expect to discover doing these interviews. I'm curious. Well, one, I guess, is that your experience? And 2, when you talk to audiences, and you can elaborate here a bit more, because I know you speak on leadership, but I know you speak on other things as well, but on people who want to do and have more in life, what advice do you give to people in that area? Because obviously you can't, I mean, some of the things, you're not going to wish on someone, a nasty shoulder injury or, a parent, to have potentially terminal disease. So how do you address that topic, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, with other people?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do feel like, again, to answer that first question, I do believe that pain is something that fuels individuals for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's exactly what it did for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you channel it the right way, right? It could go one way or the other. It could drive you into the ground, or it could propel you forward because you're kind of sick of dealing with whatever you're dealing with, And I think there's 2 ways, and it all comes down to mindset and perspective and things of that nature. But on the flip side, if you're someone that maybe doesn't really deal with pain in that sense, you by all means can continue to better your situation. It's success is available for everyone. There's no shortage of it, right? And the beautiful part of it all is like, listen, you define your own success. Success, that word is defined by you, not Merriam-Webster's dictionary.
Right.
And I love to make that point, out and put that point out there. So yes, I mean, that is definitely how I would answer the first question. Now, when I'm speaking and it comes down to talking about pain or adversity and overcoming it, honestly, I think I already touched on it a little bit, and I'm actually going to give a formula. This formula was taught to me by a mentor of mine, Matt, and it's funny, his book is behind me. His name's John Gordon. So I do want to give credit to him, J-O-N-G, and it's not the NASCAR driver. I'm just going to put that out there. That's Jeff Gordon. I'm talking John Gordon. And his formula or equation is E plus P equals O. Now, what that stands for is events plus perspective equals the outcome. Now, I'll happily pledge and preach this formula till the day I die because this is life-changing for me. Now, breaking it down, events plus perspective equals outcome, right? Events that we go through in life are not always in our control. Yet, the one thing that we always control is our perspective. I'm sure we could both agree on that. We have 100% control of our perspective. Now, basically as humans, from what I see is that we try and change that event. Like, we'll exert our energy trying to change the event that really can't always be changed, and that's what's going to determine the outcome. So to answer the second question, I think that's the best way to sum up an answer is E plus P equals O.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And no, it's more than interesting. No, I agree. I mean, it sounds like the adage, it's not what happens to you, it's kind of how you respond to it. Is that kind of about right? Is that
100%?
Yeah. And it's so funny because, well, two things go through my head. One right now is, well, so much about knowing isn't doing, like, in other words, people may well have heard that concept before. And yet, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same results. And so clearly what most of us aren't doing enough of the time is changing that perspective piece so that we get a different outcome. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm really, it's massively top of mind for me at the moment is all the autopilot ways of being and doing that all of us have. And that really until we impact those more, change those more, or firstly become aware of what those are and then do something differently, our results don't change, or as your language, the outcomes don't change. So, I mean, do you recall the first time you applied that John Gordon formula in your life?
Yeah, I actually learned it not too long ago, right? So I learned it not too long ago, but what I did was apply it to all the past events in my life for closure. And I think that was really groundbreaking for me, right? Because a lot of us don't even realize how much past events still affect our future or our present. Like, forget about the future. The only thing we really have in life is the present, right? We don't have the past. The past is gone and we're not guaranteed a future. So we don't even realize how much we drag the past along. So what I did after realizing that I was literally bringing things from being 6 years old and 20 years in the making, till 26, I was still carrying some things. I was able to provide myself with some closure when I looked back at the past events, which are less painful today just because they've already happened and you've been able to cope and you've grown and, things of that nature. And I've looked back and I realized, okay, Matt, what did you learn from this? That's what's really going to determine that outcome. What did you learn from watching your mother battle cancer? And the answer to that was probably that I needed to dedicate more time to being a family man as opposed to, let me go to a nightclub with my friends on the weekend. How about I stay in and have dinner with my mother and father and sister, right? What did I learn from failing out of college? What did I learn from getting kicked out of 2 high schools? The list goes on. So I think that would be, something that we could all apply it to as past events. I think that's a great start, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a fantastic action step. Now, how did you get to the point where now you're running your own personal branding company? Yeah,
I mean, I think it comes down to a word that is tossed around quite freely, and it's fulfillment. I was working with Daymond John as my first job out of college, an absolutely amazing opportunity. In fact, I actually gave up a startup that was funded by IBM to partake in this.
Okay.
So, it was a very great move on my part because I was able to be mentored by such an amazing individual. But after taking Go
Let me
ahead,
stop
Matt.
you. So I wanted to stop you a second, just because I don't want to assume that everyone listening is familiar with Daymond John. I mean, his name's pretty well known, but there's always some people that haven't heard of him or aren't familiar with his work. Can you just give a quick kind of bio on who he is?
Oh, for certain, yeah. So Daymond John, you could find them on Shark Tank for the past 10 plus years. Shark Tank's on ABC. I'm sure people have heard of Shark Tank. And if not, you might have heard of FUBU, which is Daymond's clothing line for the past 20 plus years. Which
because there's listeners in other countries as well. So again, just keep that in mind when you explain stuff.
Oh, 100%.
Like they may not have watched or know what Shark Tank is. I'm just saying, just assume some people know zero about some of the things you're saying, because that will give context to it. So ABC, obviously, I think most people have heard of ABC, but obviously one of the 3 national television channels in the US. FUBU, is that an international clothing brand, or is it just in North America?
International. So it's a worldwide brand. I think he had about potentially, I may be saying this wrong. I know it was over 6 billion in sales globally. Wow. Mm-hmm. So it's a massive, massive clothing brand, and it's, in the process of a resurgence. So it's out there.
Okay. And how did you work with him?
Yeah. So it was an amazing opportunity that came about. I was in college, and I was actually in the Dominican Republic enjoying a nice spring break, giving myself a break. And I received a call while I was out there in the Dominican Republic, and I looked at my phone. I'll never forget it. I looked at my iPhone, and right across it said CUNY York College, which was my college. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying to myself, what the hell are they calling me for? I know I paid my damn tuition. That's literally the only thing rolling through my head. I answered the phone, and on the other end of the line, the woman asked me if I would like to meet Daymond John of Shark Tank and FUBU, and I said, of course, let's do it. I was one of 3 students to have that opportunity. I spoke to Daymond for 5 minutes when he came to my college in the green room. He was going to do a little fireside chat there. Okay. So 5 minutes before the fireside chat, I had an opportunity to talk with him. I shook his hand. He looked at me, and he said, what the hell do they teach you here? How to break people's hands? So it was kind of good vibes off the bat. And, I looked at him after our conversation, and I said, Daymond, I'm going to work for you. And I said it just like that. Mm-hmm. And, by the graces of my network, I was able to get an in his office. And literally 2 months later, I started as an intern. And, I was with him for 3 years, 3 amazing, amazing years. But it got to a point, as I mentioned earlier, Matt, the word fulfillment came about. Yes. And I was no longer feeling fulfilled. And when you're not fulfilled, why even string anything along? And that's kind of the question I asked myself. And I needed to do some deep searching in myself. The answer wasn't going to be from a family member or a friend. In fact, they were telling me the complete opposite of what I felt like I wanted to do. And I ended up leaving my job. Originally, I left the job to chase that fulfillment. And that fulfillment came about from impacting lives, whether that was being on stages or launching a podcast, which I did in December of 2018. And, it got to a point where I realized that when I'm not speaking, I need more income. And I realized what I was passionate about was also branding, because I credit a lot of my personal success to my personal brand. And ever since, we launched 1B branding, the 1B representing the 1 billion individuals I want to impact. So kind of alignment in that sense with my goals and, with my calling and mission, as I say it is. And we've been helping, build brands and help them differentiate themselves ever since.
No, that's fascinating. So, I want to talk about branding a lot, but I've got to ask before we move on. I mean, what were the, 1 or 2 things that you felt like you learned that were the most useful for you from Daymond John? Like, if you were to give a presentation on things I learned from working with an internationally known celebrity, what would they be?
I don't want this answer to come across basic, but it might sound a little basic. Maybe it's just a good reassurance that I needed. Maybe it was something I already knew. But the first thing that always comes to mind when I'm asked this is business isn't brain surgery. And the reason I say this is because there was one instance that really made me realize this, and it was probably one of my first meetings ever with Daymond. So it was Daymond at the head of the table, me and the president of the company at the other side, and another individual on the other side. And both sides were kind of going back and forth at each other in disagreement over a certain, project. And Daymond's just there, like, with no care. And I'm saying to myself, I know he cares, yet he's not tense or he's not stressed, or, it was just like minuscule. And I had the opportunity to really pick his brain about that certain topic. And I asked him, how do you not feel stressed and things of that nature in situations like that? And he was just like, listen, man, in business, you're going to lose money, you're going to make money. If no one's life is on the line, it's a good day. That to me was something that I needed to hear, because often I see it, and with myself, I'm going to speak from my experience, we act with emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to be emotional, but at the same time, you don't want to be over emotional, and it's definitely good to have empathy and things like that. But definitely that was probably the main thing that stood out over my course of 3 years there.
Is not to take business too seriously. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Unless it's life or death.
Yeah, and it really will never be life or death at the end of the day. Knock on wood. I'm going to knock on wood for us all that are tuned in. Let's knock on wood that business isn't life or death. But yeah.
It's really interesting. So that kind of helped you perhaps relax a little bit about what you wanted to do with your own future?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I feel like we create anxiety and worry and fear, right? Listen, I experience it even till this day. Even to this day, I experience it. And, when I think about that, and Matt, you did me a favor, because I already feel a little bit more relaxed right now. Mm-hmm. When I think about that and I recall the situation and just kind of understanding that, I realize it's okay to make mistakes. You don't need to be perfect, right? And I think that's more along the lines of what I'm getting at here. Mistakes happen. You don't have to be perfect. Try it anyway. Take your shot. Things mm-hmm. of that nature. I think that's so meaningful.
That's really, really helpful, because I think there's many people listening that, for whatever reason, have just become on autopilot. It's inevitable that somehow a typical day means feeling stressed out and anxious about what's going on, and that's somehow means you're taking your work seriously. And so it's just healthy to hear about someone who, whatever, by most people's definition is at the top, but has a more relaxed attitude, or I would just say a healthy perspective on what's really going on. So it's interesting you're saying that's the thing that struck you the most about your experience of working with him.
For sure. Yeah. And of course, there's other things as well, whether you're talking about team or culture, there's things that I could talk about in literally every topic of business that I've learned. And like I said, I'm very grateful for that opportunity, but I don't mind sharing one more, and I think that one more really comes down to, team. And basically it revolves around you not having to be the smartest at every single aspect of business, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's allowed to be other people smarter than you. And in fact, your team should be built on people that supplement the things that you're not necessarily the best at. Mm-hmm. And I literally saw that firsthand with Daymond. And listen, he's a very, very smart man, but to say that he is, the master of technology would be a fib. And, the list goes on, but that's exactly why he's so smart, because he brought on people to his team to be able to create, a company that really doesn't have weak spots because of the individuals that compose of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really good to be reminded of at a minimum. Okay, so talking about your business now, the context of these interviews is meant to be more coming from getting out of your own way. So starting there, I guess, what are some of what are the well, let's start with keeping it simple. What's the biggest mistake you think people make with their own brand?
Ego.
Yeah.
Right away. That's the first thing that popped in my mind. So that's the first thing everyone's going to get. And, the reason I say that is because we kind of touched on it already, Matt. We talked about ourselves defining our definition of success, right? We often look at the world's perception of success. You need to drive a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. You have to have a penthouse in Miami or in LA or in New York. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So basically, I feel like ego gets in the way of owning our own personal brands because we are so trying to be in line with what society deems successful, that we are all out of whack and out of alignment when it comes to owning who we truly are as individuals.
Mm-hmm. So can you give an example, of somebody that has made that mistake?
Oh, myself. I think I'm the best example to give. There have been plenty of times, as mentioned earlier in the show, I was just very hungry. I was a money chaser. I thought being a money chaser was how to become successful. In fact, I thought having X amount of dollars is what success was. And I'm grateful for what I've been able to accumulate over the years. But at the same time, when you live above your means, you also lose that. So, I was very much so someone that needed to drive a certain car. Mm-hmm. I needed to wear certain clothes. I needed to eat at certain restaurants. I needed to go to certain, leisurely places for relaxation and, nightclubs and this and that, literally just things of that nature. Yet at the end of the day, of course, I like that stuff. I'm, a fan of that stuff, but at the same time, is that truly who I am? And the answer was no, and I had to find that out the hard way. There are times where I like to just be in a Nike shirt with a Nike hat like I am now, Matt. I don't always want to be in a custom-made suit, and to own myself the way I truly am, I had to realize that it's okay for me to be me, and that's exactly what I did.
You said I had to find that out the hard way. So what happened?
Oh, man, Matt, I was driving a car that was about $500 a month. It's really not that expensive when you look at the realm of cars. Of course, there's cars less expensive, and this car is way more expensive too. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I made that move kind of for status alignment. Mm-hmm. And, did it get me status alignment? Sure. Did status alignment hurt me? Sure did. It sure did, and in that part of my life, I was making transitions. For instance, going to work with Daymond John, I wasn't getting paid for X amount of months as an intern. Sacrifices were being made. I was, as mentioned earlier as well, I had a startup that was funded by IBM, and we were bootstrapping. So sacrifices mixed with trying to aim for status alignment, it bit me in the butt, and it all revolves around ego.
I've done the same thing.
Oh, listen, we're all guilty of it. As long as you learn from it, it's okay.
Yeah. Interesting. So ego. So talk about that from a branding standpoint. In other words, how can you think of someone, or even if you don't necessarily have to name names, but where you can see that where someone's ego is too big, and that actually negatively impacts their business or their appeal to the consumer?
Sure. I mean, I see it all the time where people get turned off by certain individuals, yet at the same time, people love it, right? Yeah. Especially in today's day and age, because people like a little bit of drama. People like that little dose of reality TV in a personal brand. I'm not really a big fan of it, but at the same time, listen, if that's who you truly are, I'll never ever have anything negative to say about you. I'm not one to talk about people like that. But I mean, we see it quite often, but at the same time, like I said, people do love that drama, and people do love the little hints and sprinkles of reality television wherever they can get it.
Well, wait a minute. So now I'm getting a mixed message from you. So, well, maybe I'm not. I'm not getting a message. Sorry. So what you're saying is, if that's who you truly are, then go for it. And if it's not, people will see through it. Is that what you're saying? Or they'll sense that it's fake, and therefore it's going to backfire on you. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly. So let me actually backtrack a little. And I'm going to give you a quote from one of the most famous doctors in the world. And the quote is, "There's no one in the world youer than you." The doctor's name, it just so happens to be Dr. Seuss. Now, okay. I'm pretty sure that name rings bells.
Sure.
So, when it comes to that, right, you need to find out who you are. Now, if who you are is all about ego and, status tip-offs and status alignment, then yes, sure, do your thing. Do whatever you have to do, right? If that means you need to drive a Ferrari to feel fulfilled, do it. Go right ahead. But on the flip side, if it's not and you're forcing yourself to live a life like that, or even the opposite, if it is and you're forcing yourself to live a different life, then you're going to be out of whack. You're going to be out of alignment. As you mentioned, people are going to realize that you're a fraud. And who wants to ever be looked at as a fraud, right? You want to be looked at as an expert or an authority or something of that nature. So just to clarify, that's what I meant. Okay.
And then how do you find that out? So someone's talking to you about potentially getting your help with their branding, to give away all the details, but presumably you need to find that out pretty darn quickly. Otherwise you're going to either fail with that person, or it's not, it's going to be a difficult relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a great question as well, and I think over time, I've been, it's just come a little bit more natural. So now that I'm thinking about it, it's a little hard to, just come up with this great answer. But, it's kind of when you're in rhythm, you kind of just forget like what you're really looking for. But it has over time become easier to identify individuals who are faking it to make it. And obviously we hear that all the time. In fact, some people even give advice to fake it till you make it. And that's honestly the complete opposite of what I would say, but who am I to judge someone else's advice? I'm here to give my own. So when I'm working with a personal brand or a corporation, it really comes down to really deep diving and going deep, so if you ask me a very surface level question, I'll hit you back with a why or a how or a what, really trying to dig deeper, because a lot of individuals and a lot of corporations are very surface level, right? They're at the top of the funnel, but you want to get to a point where it's just shrinking, so you could really identify the core, the values that are at that core.
That makes sense. So people have to sort of demonstrate their values better. And it's funny because, for better or worse, I've spent many of my last, I don't know how many years, 15 years, let's say, most of my clients were in the wealth management world, where in some ways I feel like they probably felt a lot more constrained about how they could show their brand. In other words, that they have to look relatively successful themselves if they're if they're doling out advice on how to manage money. And I'm just thinking this through in terms of what you've shared so far, because but then again, if the public's always just seeing someone in a suit or in high-end professional clothes, that can start to feel like fairly meaningless at some point, because that's what they expect. So I guess for people in that situation, where I suppose they have to show a certain level of professionalism, and maybe things have shifted. So can you talk about that, like people where they're in certain, like, or lawyers or accountants, where they're again, this is coming from the mouth of a 52-year-old, right? So to obviously take that into perspective as well. But how do you work differently with people in that situation or in those industries, or how do you get them to sort of show their brand in a way that still sends the right message to the public that they're trustworthy professionals?
Yeah, I think that's, another great question, and I think it comes down to understanding that there's different ways to align status other than matching someone else's, right? So Matt, for instance, if you're driving a Ferrari and I want to have a meeting with you, I don't need to pull up to your office in a Ferrari to have an aligned status. In fact, I could pull up in any kind of car. I could pull up on an electric scooter, see you get out of your Ferrari and talk to you about all of the specs in your car, and that will align our status. So there's things of that nature. Now, you mentioned, working with clients that were in wealth management and, having them, honestly having to have some sort of alignment with their clients, being that they're talking about wealth, right? They're talking about the accumulation or whatever they're, talking about. So that would be my advice, is to find ways to really align your status. And what that truly comes down to, again, let's go a little bit deeper. What that truly comes down to is really knowing who you're meeting with. And I'm not saying you don't need to know where they're born, right? Just because, Matt, if you're from Wisconsin, you don't, me telling you my sister goes to the University of Wisconsin doesn't really align our status. It's just meaningless banter. What I'm saying is really just like show that you have knowledge on something that is aligned with that other individual. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. Looking for common ground, right? But also common values, right? Which obviously goes a lot deeper than common ground, although I suppose both can play a role. So what else is important for people to understand in terms of again, from the context, I suppose, of presumably people are listening to this because they want to do and have more in life. So presumably they do want to grow their businesses. What other things do people want to do differently about perhaps what they've done so far with their branding besides ego?
Yeah, I mean, well, here's one of the biggest things that I realize, and it might not be something that they do, it might be something that they don't do. And in fact, it comes down to commitment. You know, as we all know, we can't knock down a tree with one swing of an axe or anything of that nature. So what I often see is the way people commit needs to change. And what I mean by that is this. In general terms, there's only two ways you can ever commit to something. You could either try it or you could do it, right? And
Sure.
I'm going to give you a perfect example. You know, if you are told by a significant other to take out the garbage, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to do that. Otherwise, you might end up in the doghouse, right? But on the flip side of that, if you know, you're recommended to go on a keto diet, you might say, I'll try that. Now, typically what we see is that trying only lasts, you know, X amount of time. Now, I know I gave the example of taking out the garbage, but that's only a one-time thing. But you get what I'm saying, right? Doing lasts a lot longer. So what I often see when it comes to personal brands, or honestly with many things in life, it's a lot bigger than just personal brands. What I see quite often is the way people commit doesn't last long. And they go in it with I'm going to try this mentality. And it's good to try things. It's good to try things. But that doesn't mean that you get off course just because something doesn't work, or, you know, you stop doing it because something doesn't work. You need to be fully committed in a trial and error phase.
That's really interesting. And so therefore, presumably when you work with people, you need time, right? I mean, do you have sort of a minimum commitment?
Well, I mean, what I do with 1B branding is more so on a company side. Now, when I'm delivering a keynote or something of that nature, you know, I might follow up. But what people need to understand is that there is a time piece to branding, right? It's not an overnight thing. And I think everyone that's tuned into this understands that there's no such thing as an overnight success. So
Right.
I think we're very much so getting to a point in the world where we understand that things don't happen overnight, which is helpful for many industries and people servicing those industries. So I think that is already understood. Although, you know, you have my generation, the dreaded millennial in, you know, in some parts of the world where, you know, we're impatient. We are impatient, but we are getting better. I will say that.
Well, talk about what you enjoy most about the work you do.
That's a great question. I will start by saying I love it. And the reason I love it is because it creates opportunity. Now, it's a compound effect. And what I mean by that is this. Matt, if you own a business, you've owned it for 5 years, and it's time for you to go through a bit of a rebrand. Maybe you're merging with someone, whatever the case is. Regardless, your company is set to rebrand. Now, you come to me, we rebrand your company, we literally do the whole kit and caboodle. We do an audit, we build out a strategy, we revamp the identity design of the company by creating a new logo and some typography and, you know, a brand guide with color palettes and marketing materials and things of that nature. We get a brand new website going for you. And next thing you know, over the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 quarters, you realize that you're just spiking in revenue. Now, what this causes is your company to grow, right? You might need to start onboarding more people. And what I mean by opportunity is the fact that now, through branding initiatives, you have now created more opportunity for your community or your city or your state, whatever the case is, wherever you're located, right? Wherever your company is. And I think that's the beautiful part of it, right? What can truly come about from branding is often overlooked, yet people don't realize that statistically proven, there's factual information that proves that if you're consistent with your branding initiatives, you can increase your revenue annually by 23%. Right? That's literally statistically proven, and that's absolutely amazing. So knowing that, owning that, and really seeking help, business owners that seek help for things of this nature can create opportunity. And I think that underlying factor is literally something that just makes me happy to know that we could help with.
Yeah. What goes through my mind is there must be some messaging piece in here that presumably needs to be effective. I mean, you talked about the aesthetics of a brand looking different. But then I'm thinking, I'm assuming there's more to it than that, right? It's also about how it connects to the right audience, or to the right target audience. I don't know. I mean, to the extent that you can, without divulging your entire onboarding process, I mean, what are some of the things that help you? I mean, presumably it's like anything. So what's going through my head, right, is like, obviously there's people in every line of work. Some of them are amazing and some of them are awful. And then there's everything in between. How do you get to the top of the branding world? Like, what are the sort of the traits or the skill sets that you need to be in the top 20% versus everybody else?
Well, that's a great question, Matt. I'm trying to find out that answer today. It's a competitive landscape, and it's not to say it can't be done either. I think anything that you desire can be accomplished, and it's something that I'm trying to figure out on a day-to-day basis. But what I can say from just generally what I've been able to accomplish thus far in the 6 months we've launched is how important referrals are. Now, it might sound like a silly answer, but when you start out, when you're a startup business, you might not have a client like BP Gasoline or
Right.
Pepsi Cola, right? So that's fine. You're going to work with who you could work with if it aligns with what you do. But as you continue to scale and you continue to scale and continue to scale, those referrals become the larger companies, which is a beautiful thing. So it sounds like a weird answer, honestly, when I think about it. But to get to the top, I think it comes down to is something as simple as referrals based on the work you've already been able to complete. And that all comes down to going above and beyond for the clients that you do have, being grateful for the clients you do have, because they're what's keeping you in business, right? Literally servicing them properly, building relationships. All of these things I feel like are what takes you to the top 20%. Now, if you're looking for a more branding related answer and a less business related answer, there's a million and one ways to go with it, but I think it comes down to really owning in on what you're actually really good at. And I see it all the time when it comes to looking at top agencies, specifically here in New York City.
Yeah.
There's agencies that focus on the branding space that are mainly web developers. Then you have others that are mainly brand guide developers and things of that nature. So really finding out what you are the best at, or what your team is phenomenal at, and really just zoning in all your attention on that. I think that's where you really take yourself to the top.
And do people hire you to help them craft that message that's going to resonate with people that perhaps in a way that currently isn't resonating? Or again, is that too simplistic? I mean, how much of it's message, and then because you talked about a strategic kind of planning piece to it,
Yeah.
I mean, like, can you talk about that? I mean, message versus look, or the aesthetics of the branding, and then also what's involved in a branding strategy.
Yeah, for sure. And to answer that, what I'm going to do is walk you very briefly through the 4 services we offer, because I think it might provide a lot of individuals clarity, which, the 4 services are: number 1, a brand audit. And the way I'm going to break this down, Matt, is, we look at businesses as a bucket. So you own a business, you own a bucket. Mm-hmm. Now, the goal of many business owners is to fill that bucket to the top, right? Filling your bucket to the top is called profitability. Mm-hmm. That's what we're in business for, aside from not-for-profit organizations, right? You want profitability. And oftentimes, there are cracks in that bucket. So what we do when we come in for an audit is to identify where those cracks are. Now, once we identify the cracks, what's causing them, things of that nature, we're able to create our second service, which is a brand strategy, which helps you patch the cracks in that bucket through positioning, messaging, things of that nature as you're talking about. So I think those two go hand in hand. And then, the design aspect of it, whether it's digital or identity, that comes after that. So for you to do, a digital design without doing an audit or strategy, you're kind of working backwards. You might shoot yourself in the foot and double down and spend even more money than what you plan to, so I think that is a better way for me to clarify, messaging and service and things of that nature.
And then what's the fourth service if the third one is design?
Well, there's two designs. There's two design aspects. There's identity design, which is more so not just logos, right? And I like to make this clear. A lot of individuals will go out and hire someone on Fiverr or hire someone on, one of those design websites, which is cool. Listen, if you're bootstrapping and you just need a logo, go do it. Mm-hmm. But if you are able to, I highly suggest creating a brand guide. And a brand guide is everything from your marketing collateral to, your logo, to your iconography, to your typography, to your color palettes and things of that nature. Because as mentioned earlier, Matt, if you're consistent with your branding, you expose yourself to a 23% increase in annual revenue, and who wouldn't want a 23% increase in annual revenue? So that's one design aspect. But our second design aspect is digital. So everything from UX to UI to websites, landing pages, mobile applications, web applications, everything in between, we handle all of that.
I'm sorry, what are UX and UI?
User experience and user interface.
Oh, okay. Huh. So I'm sorry. So three was design identity, and then the fourth one was design.
Digital design. Digital design.
So what it looks like online. Huh.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what is an expected? I mean, what in your ideal scenario, like what kind of commitment works best? Because as you said, it's not. Well, you didn't say it's not. You didn't say this, but I mean, I'm assuming obviously this isn't exactly totally a science. So there's presumably some trial and error, and as you said, not some things that need to just take. So what works best for a company? Is it more like a retainer where they work with you indefinitely because it's always a work in progress, or it's just a dynamic thing? Is that kind of how the best relationship to have with a branding company?
Well, it really depends on the service. If they're coming for all four, that's beautiful. And that's a little bit different than just coming to us for web design. We have clients that come to us for web design. They're happy with their logo, they're happy with their colorway and their iconography and things of that nature, and that's totally cool. So if they're coming to us for a web design, it's kind of a one-off project. If they need some monthly maintenance, we do have services for that as well. But when it comes to retainers, we don't necessarily work on a retainer basis. For audits and for strategy and things of that nature, it's kind of a one-off. Now when we work with clients, we don't kick them out of our office and say, never come back. So what we do is we always try to over-deliver. We always over-deliver on what we say we're going to be able to do. And that essentially brings people back to us saying, hey, let's continue to work. Basically, I like to say that you don't need to rebrand yourself every year. At the end of the day, sure, you should make updates to what you're doing, but you never need to, every 6 months, like, oh, let's change the line in this part of our logo. Sure. You get what I'm saying? I think that's the best way to answer that. It really depends on the service. It's not really a retainer service. It's more so, you come to us, let's figure it out. Basically depends on who the client is.
Yeah. I know we need to wrap up shortly. So what haven't I asked you about the personal branding world that you like to share or explain to people?
Matt, you've asked great questions. So that's another great one right there. That's a hard one. Honestly, I think we've hit on a lot. We've been able to talk about the two types of commitment and why it's important to commit the right way, or what I'll consider the right way. There's the very famous quote by Dr. Seuss, there's no one in the world youer than you, and that does go for your business as well. Your business is very much so unique, just like you are. I think those are very important topics to really drill home. I can't say it's hard unless, Matt, you ask me something for your personal brand to keep the advice very general.
Yeah, sure.
Just so it applies to everyone. I don't want to take anyone off a different track, but I think it was covered. I think those two things mainly are what helps people really get started or continue to elevate themselves from where they are.
And is it fair to say that you learned both those big lessons also with Daymond John? Because the way you described him was his ego actually wasn't so big that he had to be the smartest person in the room. And presumably, I don't know this, I'm assuming that there was a consistency element that you learned too working with him as to why the clothing company and maybe he too had success. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, certainly. He definitely reassured everything that I'm saying when it comes to personal branding. I've learned plenty of it from my own personal experiences now that I look
Yes.
back, whether
Yeah.
that was my failures or mistakes, or maybe it was the things that I did good. And, he didn't have an ego at all. That's the beautiful part about working with him. And I think that was exemplified through everything he did. A man that's worth over $500 million to not have an ego is really quite remarkable. In fact, he's one of the most humble, probably the most humble individual I know. And yeah, consistency. Listen, at the end of the day, to see a man that is worth $500 million still doubling down and investing in his personal brand is amazing.
So what, forgive me for putting you on the spot, but then how would you describe your own brand then, your own personal brand?
Oh, great question too. My own personal brand revolves around a few words, and I like to build my brand off of very simple words. And the words are, number one, faith. And I don't want faith to be misconstrued with anything religious. Faith is very much so faith in yourself, or another word would be belief. Belief in your work, your capabilities, your dreams, your desires, your goals, things of that nature. My personal brand is also built around the word fulfillment, as I've thrown around quite often in this interview. I think fulfillment is really big. So when I'm developing strategy for my own personal brand, it's like, all right, what are you going to do to align yourself with what fulfills you? Another one is, it comes down to, I don't want to say the word, but it's passion. I just feel like it's thrown around so often, and I don't want to sound like just another person throwing around these words, but, I'll use the word love. I think it's better than passion. And what do I love? And basically when I can combine those three things, very simple things at the end of the day, these aren't complex things. When you can combine them and create initiatives around them, your brand flourishes, right? And as long as you're in alignment with all of them, but by all means, you're going to take off.
And it's interesting, and this is me extrapolating, so correct me because I'm maybe mistaken, but the fact that you talked earlier about kind of getting rid of past baggage, or I forget your exact language, but coming to peace with use closure for things, that aligns to what you've just said too, because you can be more of yourself and be a person of having faith or belief in yourself, dreams, fulfillment, and doing things out of love. You can't do that if you're carrying around tons of baggage, in my life experience. So it seems like that piece as well then fits with the alignment and keeping your ego out of it. I'm just trying to put the pieces together for people listening as well as for myself. That's a great message. I love it. And then it's putting that into all the work you do, right? So because you've got your company, but then there's the speaking, and just for the audience's benefit as well as mine, what topics do you speak most on?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. It varies based on the audience, obviously. I've spoke on everything from personal branding and how to own your personal brand. We kind of dove into a few of the steps that, on this show right here, which is great. There's other steps such as identifying, and I like to say identifying, not finding your purpose in life, because I think there's two different ways to look at that. That's another one of the steps. Then I've talked about overcoming adversity, again, kind of something that we discussed here with the E+P=O formula. I have talked about leadership. I've actually done leadership workshops, which are really, really fun. I've had these 6 success principles that I've talked about in the past. Just amazing stuff. Any way that I can impact an audience, as long as I could speak on it from experience, I'm more than open to talking about it.
That's awesome. All right, so a couple wrap-up questions. First off, I guess I'll just pick an instance. So let's start with the restaurant. We started there. So since that day in the restaurant, when you were watching the TED Talk, and it talked about legacy over currency, who have you become?
Oh, man, a totally different person, Matt. A totally different person. Honestly, I'm getting the chills even thinking about that. You give me the chills with that question. I've become someone that is more so focused on the giving than the getting. More so focused on the giving than the getting. Don't get me wrong. I like to get still. But I very much so feel fulfilled in the giving. And I lived a life completely different. So to look back on that and to realize how much I've changed and grown as a young adult and a young man, and just in pursuit of my dreams and in pursuit of my purpose and mission.
Mm-hmm.
To be someone that gives is, really meaningful to me. So I appreciate you asking that to me, because it's really never asked. So thank you.
Good. Awesome. Thank you. And then how can people find out more about you?
Yeah. I'm all over, man. I'm all over. One of the things that keeps me very unfocused when I'm working is the fact that I'm all over. I'm on my website all the time, mattlebris.com.
Okay.
In fact, I actually have a personal branding ebook out there. It's totally free. If it's something that people are interested, you can just grab that on my site. I'm all over LinkedIn. I'm doubling down on LinkedIn. That's how me and you were connected, Matt. We were connected on LinkedIn.
Yep.
But just my name, Matt LeBris. I'm on the Facebooks. I'm on the Twitters and the Instagrams. Just the same thing,
Okay.
Matt LeBris.
Good stuff in your Ferrari, of course. And so spell your name for people listening or driving, or just so it reinforces. How do you spell your name?
Certainly. So it's Matt. Last name is Lebris.
Brilliant. Okay. Actually, I'd be curious about that, but anyway, we've had plenty of time to talk. Other than that, I guess that's kind of where we should probably wrap things up. So Matt, thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom, I guess personal and professional. So I always find both to be of major interest. And I think it's always good to connect the dots on where people started to sort of how they are doing what they're doing now. And I feel like kind of hearing more about your journey, which also sounds like it's been extremely, extremely hard and painful at times, has led you to, now being able to sort of live it out in a really passionate way, now it all makes a lot more sense, I think, because it's coming from this authentic place rather than just some, book you read where you kind of, this is a good business to be in or something like that. So I love what you're doing and how you're helping people. So thank you for sharing all those things. Listeners, a lot to take from this in terms of things we can do certainly professionally and things not to do professionally, as well as some really good ideas personally. I mean, I guess I'll refer back to the closure piece from that formula that Matt mentioned earlier in the interview. But some other things I think that we can also, take action on in terms of, like I said, the consistency piece and the ego piece. And well, it's ironic you mentioned referrals as well, but different strategies there. So otherwise, all the show notes will be on the website. So please go to matt-anderson.com for that, matt-anderson.com. Please leave a review on the podcast if you haven't, or subscribe if you haven't. And then also please, if you're looking to grow yourself professionally or personally, and kind of feel like you're still bumping into ceilings, then I would definitely encourage you to talk to me about the masterminds I'm launching in September. I'm already running several, and they're so Matt used the word love in terms of what you're doing there. They're really inspiring me and the people in them. So definitely ask me more about that. Otherwise, Matt, thank you so much. Fantastic. Thanks for your time. An honor to spend some time with you, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you. And with that, I'll wrap things up with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.